Okay, so this video is going to be a little bit dark. It's going to be about suicide, specifically my father's suicide. So if that's not something you think you're capable of dealing with right now, I would suggest you not watch this video. And we're dealing with a heat wave here in California, so I apologize for my appearance, but it's very hot. Anyways, the video I made a couple of days ago in the cemetery, I mentioned that my younger sister had accused me of being the reason our father committed suicide. And I wanted to delve a little bit into that because there's a lot. There's a lot there. And it's not something that I've fully explored. So, one thing I think that needs to be understood is that suicide is never really just caused by one person. There's normally a lot of different things happening in that person's life that makes them feel like they can't do it anymore. For my father, there was a lot going on. Now, it's possible that he was hurt by my not inviting him to my graduation. I'm not going to say that's not possible. I was the only child that graduated. But on the other side, I would say my brother would have had a graduation had they not chose to pull him out of school because the school was asking questions. So he kind of fucked himself out of going to one of his children's graduations, because when my brother turned, I think 16 or 17, whatever age was legal to drop out, our parents pulled him out of the school. So he didn't graduate. And he was a guaranteed graduate because he was so disabled he couldn't do anything. So he passed every year. There's no failing you if you can't do nothing. My younger sister also dropped out of school. So she's accusing me of causing our father's suicide by not inviting him to my graduation when she chose to give up and not have a graduation herself to invite him to. So there's two that he was fucked out of, one by his choice, one by hers. My older sister also dropped out. So before I graduated, there was already one that didn't graduate. So if he was that upset that he didn't get the ticket to my graduation because I was the only one that graduated, why don't you look a little bit towards the rest of the family to see why there were no other graduations he could have gone to keep him from being that disappointed? But again, there were a lot of other things going on. Just after I left the house, for some reason, everything fell to shit. And I wasn't there to say why that happened, but they had a feud with the neighbors that ended up with my father and my older sister weaponizing my brother's soiled diapers at their house. There was a lawsuit, and the family eventually moved. I don't know if they had to move or if they chose to, but around that time they had moved into a different place. Older sister and younger sister had both dropped out and were living with them at this time. So our father had reason to be disappointed. Yeah, he had two adult children, one with children of their own and their boyfriends living with him. Well, three adult children. Sorry, Bubba was an adult technically, but he couldn't leave, so it wasn't his choice. I would be disappointed. I was on my own. I moved out. I got married. And around this time, around, I guess, 2007, my mom before, sorry, dad's suicide was in 2006. This would have been 2005. Mom ran away. Mom wound up in New Orleans with some family that tracked us down and begged us to take her back because they couldn't handle her. Dad was living in the trailer with my older sister, her husband, boyfriend, whatever, and their children, and Bubba. And my little sister as well. My older sister comes to my job with her children and asks me if I will watch her children while she goes grocery shopping. It's near Thanksgiving. I say yes. She's gone for 2 hours. She comes back, takes the children. I go home because I was at work. I was taking a break from work to do this, to watch them. I get back home and find that my door has been pried open and my fridge is empty. And my older sister had gone grocery shopping in my kitchen. And I drove over to their house and I confronted them about this. It didn't go well, but my father was aware that his oldest child was stealing food from his middle child. That's pretty fucking disappointing, if you ask me. I don't have children. Maybe a normal father would take that perfectly in stride. Also, around the time of the suicide, specifically about a month before, my father had gone to my grandmother and asked her for $10,000 and got denied the $10,000. So they were massively in debt, drug addicted, and living in this house with their grown children who had no intention of leaving. It would have been a nightmare. The story that I was told was that mom and dad were fighting, never told what they were fighting about. Could have been drugs, could have been money, could have been me. Who the fuck knows? They were fighting. Mom runs into the bathroom to hide, locks the door. Dad gets a gun, screams at her that if she does not leave the bathroom and take her punishment and allow her to beat her the way he always did, he's always beat her. She refused to open the door, and somehow he fired the gun and he shot himself with his children watching and screaming at him to fucking calm down. This was something that he had threatened many times in the past. The reason that my go to is I'll just fucking kill myself is because my entire life I heard my parents screaming that whenever things got rough that they were just gonna fucking kill themselves. It's just, it's part of the vernacular of the way I was raised. And it's still in my heart, it's still in my head, it's still where my mind goes when I get frustrated, even overwhelmed. He had started a trucking business and it wasn't going well. My father was hard to work with. When I was a kid, he had a band and his band kicked him out because he was too controlling. Eventually, he couldn't work with other people anymore, so he wanted to have his own company. He started this trucking company, but then he didn't have the means to keep it going. He didn't have the men to keep it going. And I think the reason he was going to my grandmother, personally, I think that my grandparents were financially supporting my parents while I was in school. And when I graduated, that financial support cut off and they started running into trouble. And part of the reason I say that is because I can remember specifically when my grandfather passed away, I was supposed to take a school trip to Washington and it cost like $1,000. And my grandparents sent the money, but the trip was canceled and my parents decided to keep the money and take themselves on a second honeymoon. That was the kind of stuff they would do. So my assumption is that my parents were financially supported by my grandmother because she thought that they were taking care of me, because that $1,000 wasn't supposed to go towards their honeymoon. It was supposed to go towards my education. And if they were constantly telling her that they needed things for my education, she would have helped. But once my education was passed, they had no loophole for instant money. And they had to fend for themselves, and they couldn't. So I don't know exactly what happened in the 3 years after I moved out and he killed himself, but I find it very hard to believe that it happened specifically because I didn't invite him to my graduation. There's a whole lot else that was going on at the time. And my younger sister wants to put the blame on me because she doesn't want to look at herself. She doesn't want to ask herself why she didn't stick it out and give him a graduation to go to, or why she was living in the house with him at the time instead of moving on and being her own person like I was trying to be, so that she wouldn't disappoint him. In the end, it's not because of me, and it's not because of my sister, and it's not because of my brother, it's not because of anything other than drugs and the violent nature that my parents had. There's a lot of blame that goes on, but a lot of it is because they don't want to look at the extenuating circumstances. They want to find the one person that is evil and say that's the evil. And life is never that black and white.